And we are tonight getting to what is probably the beginning of the most exciting part of the book of Revelation for you. Well, you'll see what we're talking about there. I just want to remind you, we were looking not last week. Last week we were hiding from a tropical storm. I want to thank the bold people, and I had several of them that like 2 hours before the time with the wind blowing and all the torrential rain, several people, sent me a message, are we having Bible study tonight? And I just want to say, I really admire that kind of fortitude and that desire, but basically, anytime we have a named storm and it is bearing down on us, we're not going to plan to meet that evening, just as a general rule, so we all know. Okay, so we're last time, which was 2 weeks ago, we were at Revelation chapter 12, and we were looking at we're starting a section in Revelation where we're seeing some of the major characters or some of the major, you might say, persons or some of the major players in the end time events. And so we last time saw in Revelation chapter 12 the red dragon that appears there, that comes up out of the waters. And this red dragon, you say, why red? Violence, blood of God's people shed. This, of course, stands for Satan. And he comes up as this dragon with all of these 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, we've been very blessed to have photographers just on the scene sometimes, and that was the case here. As what we have here's somebody's rendition of the dragon there, and you might just imagine again what it was like for John, who, remember, he's just recording what he is seeing, and God's letting him see this. And if you, once more, have ever been in any kind of like a sense around kind of a theater or anything like that, this had to be much, much more so what he experienced seeing this dragon. And yet this dragon stands for, this is not what Satan looks like, actually. This is representative of some truths about him or how he's working upon the earth. But this dragon stands for the devil, and that's made clear in the text, as we saw there, about this dragon, Satan. This turns out to be Satan. And remember, we're introduced here to this struggle going on. He wants to devour the male child that is being born by the woman, which is Israel. And so he desires to do that. There is war in heaven. He is thrown out of heaven with his demonic angels. This harkens back to what happened to him at the fall, but it's going to happen, it seems, again in some kind of a practical way, where not only his authority, which has been broken from heaven since the fall, but now even his ability to go there at all, he gets thrown out from the presence of God in all senses, and upon the earth. And in this last 7, which is 7 years, is, remember, the 77s of Daniel, very important. The tribulation period, and what we're looking at in the Revelation right now, is the final 7, and remember that 7 what? 7 years. But it's sometimes referred to in your Bible, most translations will say 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9, but literally in Hebrew it says 77s. And so you have 70 sets of 7. 69 of those were used up to the cutting off of Messiah. We enter a parenthetic time in God's program where the age of the church is, but we're waiting for the final 7. The final 7 belongs to the same group that the first 69 belonged to. Daniel, there are going to be 77s for your people. And so it's for Israel. So what we're seeing is God's program that is restarted for Israel again during the tribulation. So that's why you have this 144,000 Israelites going around as witnesses. That's why you see the emphasis upon the dragon wanting to devour the male child, of course, and that imagery come back about the struggle between Israel, because not only is there war with Michael, but then the devil goes out to the dragon. This is the devil goes out to do war against the children of the woman, and this would be those the believers that are going to put their faith in Christ during the time of the tribulation. And God protects, and at the same time, he protects the nation so it continues to exist. But the dragon goes out enraged with the woman to make war with the rest of her children. And that is the persecution that we're seeing that goes on throughout the book of Revelation. Tonight we are coming, though, to chapter 13. And we get two more persons, if you would, or characters that will be introduced in Revelation. And this, again, is what a lot of people, from the time you talk about we're going to be studying Revelation, because chapter 13, here's the introduction of the treatment of two characters, two more, the Antichrist and the false prophet. And how much have you heard about that? If you look at anything with prophecy, with any study on the book of Revelation, always a lot of time looking and talking about the Antichrist and the false prophet. So tonight, we're starting here in chapter 13 with the Antichrist. And let me just say, in regard to the Antichrist, that we need again to remember back to that 70th seven, that final seven that Daniel talked about. And let me just show you here. Daniel chapter 9, remember 70, again, this word is where it's literally 77s have been decreed for your people and your holy city. And he talks about, from the time that there's a decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the cutting off of Messiah, you use 69 of those. And then you get to the end. Now, when he gets to toward the end of this passage, and this is a very key passage to me for us to understand sort of the framework that these final events hang on to, because this is the last seven in the book of Revelation. And he talks about here the cutting off of Messiah after the 62 weeks, and he's already had 7 weeks. He talked about earlier. Now there's 62 more, which gets you to 69. The Messiah will be cut off. That's the crucifixion of Christ. And then the people of the prince who's to come are going to destroy the city, he says. Its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. And then it says, and he will make a firm covenant. The he that it's talking about, just to be clear here, the he is the prince who is to come, which is not talking about the Prince of Peace. This is the Prince of Darkness. This is the Antichrist, specifically the one that we're going to read about tonight. He, the Antichrist, it turns out, is going to make a firm covenant with the many for 1 7. But in the middle of it, which is, you have a 7, so the middle of it would be 3.5 years in. In the middle of it, that 7, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. Now, this is referred to later on in the New Testament as the desolation, or the abomination of desolation, or the abomination that causes desolation. This is some terrible act that the Antichrist, this prince who's going to be coming, is going to do halfway through the tribulation. And that is going to go on even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. So the Antichrist, it turns out, the one who is going to break the covenant, commit this abomination of desolation, ultimately he will be judged. And we're going to read about that in the book of Revelation too. But this is the framework, again, that it all comes to. Now, this was written in the prophet Daniel, going back 600 years almost before Christ, that this gets written by Daniel. Now, I'm going to tell you, just so you know, if you were to read any kind of a secular work on the prophet Daniel, if you were to go to Wikipedia and type up, the book of Daniel, it's going to tell you that the book of Daniel was actually a group of oral legends that were written by the Jewish people somewhere around 200 BC, purporting to be Daniel, but really just a bunch of legends. And the reason why the secular source says that is because there are all these just dead-on prophecies that God gives to the prophet Daniel that there's no way in the world, the secular world says, that anyone can know stuff ahead of time like that. This has to be fixed. So I just want you to know that when they say that the book of Daniel is written at a really late date, that's because they don't believe in the ability for God to prophetically speak. And there's no outside evidence that conforms to that or that supports that. This isn't something that, we found a document saying where a group of Jews sat around at 150 or 200 BC and wrote this book and said, hey guys, let's all pretend like we're Daniel. No, it's not like that at all. The only thing we have is the ancient text, but they're just saying there's no way. And so the Jewish people had this book, And along the way, they have this truth that there are 77s and what's going to happen. And there's this man who comes and commits the abomination which makes desolate. What could that be? Well, I want you to know that the Jews, as you came into the New Testament time, they thought that this had been fulfilled already. They thought it had been fulfilled by a Greek king by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus IV Epiphanes, to be exact. And this was a king who, well, let me show you here. I think we've got him somewhere here as well. Yeah, so here's the question. Who? I mean, by the way, everybody wants to know, who is the Antichrist going to be? We'll talk about that. Who is the Antichrist? We'll come back to that. But they said, hey, it's this guy Antiochus IV Epiphanes, king of the Seleucid Empire. He reigned from 175 to 164 BC. This is one of the four sections of the Greek Empire when Alexander the Great swept across the world and conquered the entire known world. By the time he was in his early 30s, there was like nothing else left to conquer. He dies suddenly in his early 30s, and his kingdom got broken into four pieces. And four of his generals, they divided the known world at that time, and they each began reigning over that. This is one of those empires called the Seleucid Empire. It reigned over the area that included Syria, or Aram in the Old Testament, there just to the north of Israel. And this guy, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, which is, by the way, Epiphanes means the revelation, the revealed one. And this was a divine name, a divine claim, like God manifest, God revealed. Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He was such an unstable character, though, and he was so violent that he was called behind his back Antiochus Epimedes, which means the madman. And because he did things that were so absolutely, or Epimenes, Antiochus Epimenes, which means the madman, the insane man, because of the things he did. So he went and he wanted to conquer Egypt. And he went down and tried to conquer Egypt once. He went down to do it again, got repulsed. It was on his way after that he stopped off and decided to try to bring Hellenizing influence into Israel. It was 167 BC. He came back in a fit of anger. He had failed in Egypt, and he's trying to spread the Greek culture. He was a great Hellenizer, wants the Greek culture to go everywhere, and he wants to be king over as much as he can be. Comes there, and here are these stubborn Jews who never want to accept the Greek way of life. And so what he does, he goes into the temple with his army there. He goes into the temple. He erected an altar to Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem, and he sacrificed a pig on the altar. And you know what that is to the Jews, that totally unclean defiling. And so he did so much wicked to oppress the Jewish people. This is what brought about a Jewish guy by the name of Judas Maccabeus to ultimately, it incited him to begin a rebellion to repulse these guys. And so the Maccabean revolt and everything that happened in that period of time came about because of this madman who came there to just with hatred for the things of God, oppress the Jewish people. They said this was what Daniel was talking about. I mean, wouldn't that make sense to you in that day? As this was the abomination of desolation? How much worse can it be? You sacrifice a pig in God's temple to Zeus, a pagan deity? And so you say that was it. Except when Jesus was on earth in his ministry, in Matthew 24, he talked about the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 9 as being something that was yet future, not past. He didn't say, remember when Antiochus Epiphanes came? No, he doesn't say it at all. Therefore, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. And then Matthew includes this, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So in his ministry, as Jesus is talking with the disciples about the last day events, Lord, tell us what are going to be the signs of the final wrap-up of these things? And he talks about Daniel chapter 9 here. That phrase, the abomination of desolation, a direct tie to that. So then you talk today to someone, remember we talked about the different ways that people interpret the book of Revelation? The group called the preterists, which means that means in the past. And a preterist interpreter, which there are major denominations that would hold to that, Reformed denominations like the Presbyterian Church, for instance, would say that the book of Revelation, all of these things we're reading about, were actually fulfilled back in the first century. They're just spiritual truths that are meant to teach us lessons. But they would have said that this, they said, got fulfilled what was talked about here by Jesus and what was talked about by Daniel. They say that was fulfilled in 70 A.D. because there was another guy that came and caused trouble for Jerusalem, a guy by the name of General Titus Vespasianus. Titus Vespasianus Augustus. I don't usually say his Vespasianus name. That's the middle name. I just thought, let's hear the whole thing here. But General Titus, who in 70 A.D., because of the Jews who are continuing to cause trouble for Rome, he goes and attacks Jerusalem. And this is where all of the things that Jesus spoke about prophetically that were going to happen in Jerusalem, the temple would be destroyed, not one stone would be left upon another. The Romans dug through all the stones looking for gold to pry off of it. All that Jesus said would happen happened in 70 A.D. And so today, a preterist interpreter would say that was the fulfillment of Daniel 9, what happened in the destruction of 70 A.D. But here's the thing. When General Titus came, he did not sacrifice a pig on the altar. He destroyed the temple, but he didn't do anything to it. In fact, he did not do something very specifically that was talked about later on in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul, when he was writing to the Thessalonians, you remember when he's talking about the Antichrist, it turns out, let no one in any way deceive you, he says to his readers, for it will not come about. The it here is the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord, he says, will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. This is what we're talking about here. Who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. This is the abomination of desolation that Paul's talking about here. It is at the halfway point of the tribulation, it turns out, when the Antichrist, who has been a man of peace up to that time and has fooled everyone, sits down in the temple and announces that he is God. And he then demands to be worshiped as God, we're going to see. We're going to read about that tonight. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, Paul says, I was telling you these things? Now, this prophecy that Paul wrote by the Spirit of God to the Thessalonians, that there would be a one who would sit, this man of lawlessness. Remember that's who we're talking about here, the man of lawlessness. That this man of lawlessness that despises all of God's law, this man will sit in the temple and declare himself to be God. General Titus never did that. So you never had the abomination of desolation. So we've still got something prophetically that is hanging and waiting to be fulfilled about Daniel chapter 9, the prince who makes a covenant with the many and then halfway through breaks it and commits the abomination of desolation. So what could it be? Well, I'll tell you what it could be. It could be Revelation chapter 13 and 14. So that's where we're heading back to now. And chapter 13... let's take a look. And by the way, before we go any further, so who is that Antichrist? Do you remember that in 1 John chapter 2, John wrote to his readers, and they were being bothered by a lot of false teachers. Children, it is the last hour. And just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many antichrists have appeared. From this we know that it is the last hour. Now, John wrote this in the first century, and he says, you guys know that the Antichrist is coming. But already there are a bunch of antichrists already here. If you want to, you can think of this, although they don't have capitalization used like that in the Greek text. You can think of this as the Antichrist is coming, capital A, but a lot of small letter antichrist, ones who have the same spirit as the Antichrist, the ones who are being used by Satan to do the same kind of stuff against God's people. We already have a bunch of those in the world. And this is the tricky thing, as people are always wanting to know the answer to that question. Again, the who is it? Who is the Antichrist going to be? Right? That who question. That's what I'm getting back to. Who is it? And so there have been a lot of people who have guessed with this. And some of the guesses, you just think if you were alive at that time, you would say the same thing. I think that in more recent history, Adolf Hitler. My goodness, if you had, now I don't know how many we have here that might have been alive at that time, but I mean, here you have a madman who absolutely is given over to satanic things. We know that he despised everything of the true God. He hated the Jewish people. He's killing them, trying to exterminate them from the planet. He's trying to take over and rule. And if you'd been alive at that time, it would have been really tempting to say, there's the Antichrist, there's the Antichrist. But it turns out he's just an Antichrist. Now, already many Antichrists have come. So some of them seem like, well, that would have fooled. Back in the 1970s, the one that was really popular was Henry Kissinger. Yeah, a lot of people talked about that. What was he, Secretary of State for after Richard Nixon and stayed in? Yeah, they said Henry Kissinger, he's the one. And then along comes Mikhail Gorbachev in history, and man, he's got this, the Russian president. He's got this big birthmark on his forehead, and everybody, there he is. He's got the mark right on him, and that seems so. Oh, you could go on. Many say one of the popes of the Roman Catholic Church, Saddam Hussein, was a front runner until he was assassinated. Bill Gates, someone says. I read somebody saying it's Bill Gates. Could be. I mean, but here's the thing. You could pore over that trying to determine and say, I know who it is. I know who it is. And when we do that, what we do is we set ourselves up to not only embarrass ourselves, but to embarrass the Lord as far as his word. I mean, before people. When we stand and say, this is him, world, you just watch it. It's like somebody that proclaims that this is the day Jesus is coming back. Or the problem with that, and they say it absolutely says it in the Bible. Remember Harold Camping, that 88 reasons why Christ is coming back in 88. 89 reasons why he's coming back in 1989. And the 89th was he didn't come back last year. And then again, 2011, I think it was, they declared again, or was it 2013, that he's coming back. On and on this goes. Here's the thing. Let's talk about what it is that the Lord does tell us and where we can stand, and let's stand clear upon that. All right, so I think we are ready. Yeah, let's go back and take a look now. So we are at chapter 13, and turn there if you're not there already. And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. This is the vision he's seeing. There's the sea, the seashore. The dragon stands on the sand of the seashore. And again, who is the dragon? Satan. That's specifically said in Revelation 12. You don't have to guess. That is Satan, the serpent of old who was in the Garden of Eden. Satan stands on the sand of the seashore, and then here it comes. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. By the way, who else had 10 horns and 7 heads? The dragon back in chapter 12. He had 7 heads and 10 horns. Same thing here. And on his horns were 10 diadems. And on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Let's talk about this for a minute. There is this beast, as the dragon is by the seashore. And remember, John is like standing back watching this vision. The dragon is at the seashore by this sea. And suddenly up out of the water of the sea, there comes this beast that is unlike anything John has ever seen. Well, there are a lot of things in Revelation unlike anything God's ever seen, or John's ever seen, you might say. But here you go. Now, a few things to say. First of all, in verse 1, when it says, actually, I should have told you this already. And it says here in the New American Standard, and the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. If you've got another translation, yours might say, John said, and I stood on the sand of the seashore. Just want to let you know, there is a textual question there, and the evidence is much stronger for, and he stood on the seashore, which would refer to the dragon, not John. So that's why the New American Standard and some of the more recent translations that actually go back to older manuscripts that have been found since the King James, for instance, was translated. That's why you sometimes see those kind of discrepancies. We just have more evidence coming in to ascertain. So the dragon standing on the seashore, up comes this beast out of the sea. And you say, what is this about the coming up out of the sea? The sea, it turns out, is a figure in the book of Revelation. Now, remember I said there's a couple of ways. If you want to know, is this a symbol? And if it's a symbol, how do I interpret it? There's a couple of ways you can do it. Sometimes these symbols are defined throughout the rest of the scripture. For instance, the lamb that is there in Revelation, that we know a lamb sacrificial, that goes back to the Old Testament temple, goes back to Jesus when he's spotted by John the Baptist, behold the Lamb of God. And then so when you see a lamb in Revelation, you don't have to ask too long, who does that refer to? Especially as you keep reading the text. Well, what about the sea? There's nothing that we would go to that would say, here's the symbol for that. But in the book of Revelation, it specifically says. See, another way you can know, if it's not defined elsewhere in the Old Testament or earlier in the New, is sometimes the book of Revelation itself will say, and this is what this stands for. And so the sea, in the book of Revelation also, in chapter 17, verse 15, we're going to see it says there, and he, an angel that's talking to John about another vision, says, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits, there's a harlot that sits on the waters of a sea. The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the sea, it turns out, represents in that vision all of the nations of the world. Now, to a Jewish person, the term we would use today would be the Gentiles. These are the Gentile nations. That is, the nations of the world. In the New Testament, typically it's just simply the word. We pronounce it ethnos, where we get the word ethnic, means the nations. In Hebrew today, and back in the Old Testament too, they would call them the goyim. And maybe you've heard a Jewish person say that before. The goyim. Those troublesome nations that cause trouble for the Jewish people. Well, the beast comes up out of the goyim. It comes up out of the body of all the nations. Which this Antichrist, what this is telling us is this beast that's going to come on the scene is coming from the nations of the world. That is, he's not Jewish. So here from the nations of the world, which again, if it has to tie in with the final empire from Daniel, which would be the Roman Empire that gets revived, this would be something of the nations of the world. He has the same set of identifying marks with the 7 heads and the horns. Interesting that with this beast that comes up, the diadems, which are the ruling crowns, are not on the heads, but they're on the horns. Now with the dragon, they were on the heads, which we said those heads might well stand for empires throughout the whole time of the earth. If you go back and look at the different empires that had rule over the land of Israel throughout history. But the Antichrist, this beast, we'll call him the Antichrist sometimes. We're going to see it's who he is. But this beast, he has the diadems, the ruling crown over the horns. It turns out the horns, when you look at the flow of history, the horns come up out of that final empire at the very, very end of time. So his rule is not over all of the kingdoms that happened before. His rule is specifically on earth in that more finite time of the final 7. So the diadems are over those 7 horns, and those horns, it turns out, are defined other places as kings. In fact, this is, again, very much like what you see, some of this same imagery back in chapter 12, verse 3 with the dragon. The horns and the heads, blasphemous names are written on the heads. The whole character of this one who is coming is he hates God. He speaks vile, filthy things towards God. And the beast which I saw, and then we get into this description. The beast that I saw, he says, was like all of this, some combination. The beast was like, and look at this, it was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. Got to put that together. So, in fact, it so happens that same photographer was over and saw, I got this picture, and so there you go with the body of a leopard and the paws of a bear and the mouth of a lion and all what John would have said. I'm not saying this is an exact photograph. It's been photoshopped a little bit maybe, but I'm saying John, this is what he saw in this image. Now these 3 animals that are mentioned, the leopard and the bear and the lion, those 3 animals, you say, why is those animals being used? This ties back again prophetically to the Old Testament, to the book of Daniel. There's a lot in the book of Daniel that ties to this. So Daniel chapter 7, if you go back there, this is where Daniel sees this vision of all these different beasts. You remember the 4 beasts that he sees? And each of the beasts, it turns out, when it's explained to him, stands for a different kingdom that is going to come upon the earth. So the beasts stand for different kingdoms. And so Daniel chapter 7, 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea. From the sea. Turns out, all of these different beasts that would come and take over the land of Israel from Daniel's time would arise from the Gentile nations, not the Jews. So all these beasts come up from the sea, different from one another. And look at this. The first was like a lion and had wings of an eagle. I kept looking till its wings were plucked. It was lifted up from the ground, made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind also was given to it. And behold, and that, by the way, that description ties to the nation of Babylon, which was the nation on earth during Daniel's initial part of his captivity, starting in his lifetime, as he was taken in 605 BC to go to Babylon. And then after that, he says, behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear. And the bear, it turns out, is going to stand for the Mede and Persian, the Medo-Persian Empire, which is what comes after Babylon's time and conquers Babylon. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said to it, arise, devour much meat. After this I kept looking, behold, another one like a leopard, which had on his back a leopard which comes. And this is another kingdom. It turns out that this is the kingdom of Greece, which comes with incredible speed, like the leopard. No one would have thought that you could have swept and conquered the whole world like Alexander the Great did. And so these very same 3 animals, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, are all right here in Daniel chapter 7. That ties back to the description that is made here about the description of this beast that comes up out of the sea, the Antichrist. So he has the characteristics of conquering. He has the characteristics of all of those that have conquered and oppressed God's people throughout history. The Antichrist has that same character about him, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. The power, the throne, and the authority of the Antichrist, this beast that comes up out of the sea, it comes directly from Satan, the dragon. So the Antichrist is not just a wily, mischievous man. He's not just someone who's like a really bad criminal. He is someone that is infused with the very power, the authority, the throne of Satan. And then this description goes on to be stated regarding the head. He says, and this, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And this is a description, one of these 7 heads gets wounded. Later on, it's going to say wounded with a sword. And there's some kind of a wound to one of the heads, and then that fatal wound, which would have killed that head, it's revived, comes back to life. And so what is that talking about? Interestingly, the prophetically talking about a head of one of these things. You go back again to Daniel, you ask the question, okay, are we talking about when it says one of the heads had been slain? We already know that a head can refer to a kingdom, but could it also be referring to a person like the Antichrist specifically? And the answer is yes. They're actually in Daniel chapter 2, where Daniel is interpreting the vision for Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Remember of the statue? And wherever the sons of men dwell, Daniel's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, the king, wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he's given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold, he says to Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. But then he goes on to say, after you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze who will rule over all the earth. Now notice he shifts from Nebuchadnezzar, you, and then he says, and another kingdom. So he's not just talking to Nebuchadnezzar as an individual. He is because he's the king. But he's saying, Nebuchadnezzar, you stand for the kingdom that is currently over the earth. There's another kingdom and another kingdom after that that's coming. I just want you to see that a head, which remember the heads of the dragon, the head of the Antichrist, the head can refer to a kingdom, such as the ones that ruled over the earth and oppressed the Israelites, or it can also refer to an individual. I think both those ideas are summed up with the Antichrist when we go back and read that. By the way, let me read back. I was in Daniel 7 earlier. I'd meant at that time to go ahead and read this for you. Just let me give you, after he identifies those 3 animals, then he talks about a 4th animal coming, and this is the Roman Empire. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet. It tore apart all the other empires before it. That's what Rome did. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns. 10 horns. And while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Now again, the Jews might have said, that was Antiochus Epiphanes. Well, it turns out, and this is the nature of biblical prophecy. Sometimes we say, well, okay, here's the word of God. He says something's going to happen. Where's the fulfillment? There is the fulfillment. Well, sometimes in prophecy, it happens like this. There's a prophecy, and then there's a near fulfillment. And then there is sometimes even another resonating fulfillment, and then there's an ultimate final fulfillment further down the road. And this is what with this Antiochus Epiphanes, I'm not saying that he was not at all alluded to in the book of Daniel, but he was not the final thing. He was like a sampling of what's going to come one day. And he was if you would, a foreshadowing of the ultimate fulfillment. And notice, it comes with the 4th beast, the Roman Empire, and which is before Antiochus' time. It's after the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. There's the Roman Empire, and that is where you have these 10 horns, and then one very notable one that grows up and has eyes like a man. It's a man, but he utters great boasts. And we're going to see how that keeps getting mentioned prophetically. All right, so here we go, back to Revelation again. Excuse me. So the head, It could be a kingdom. I mentioned about this head that receives this wound, one of the heads. It could be a kingdom. You talk about the revived Roman Empire of these 7 heads. The final one, it seems like for a time the Roman Empire's gone. Today people say, where's the Roman Empire? Again, of all those empires that ruled over the land of Israel in history, the only one that never got conquered by an outside kingdom and replaced was Rome. It fell apart, it disintegrated, but the very people into which it disintegrated, they became the people that lived there. Today it's modern Europe. And somebody would say, well, Rome is gone. Well, we still have the ruins all right there in the same nations or places or cities. And one day that head, which seems like it is completely dead, is going to be revived in the time that we're looking at, where there are once again kings and a particular king who rules over it all against God. So that could certainly be a part of that what that's talking about. But it also seems as you go on, like the head that's been slain might identify specifically with the Antichrist himself, like he receives some kind of what would be a fatal wound, but then he doesn't die. And so we'll see. We're not sure on that. We can just kind of give a best guess of how that works together. And again, by the way, this is good biblical interpretation. When you cannot tell for sure in the text or in the scripture, don't try to be absolutely for sure. I tell you exactly what it is. It's better to say, could be this, could be that. And the Lord will reveal it as we go. But I want you to see here how it is that the world responds to the Antichrist. How is the world going to respond? And we start seeing that right here. Oh, let's do this. Let's just get rid of all these. Let's get rid of all these bothersome things here. Okay. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, and look at this, who is like the beast? And who is able to wage war with him? That's how the world responds to the Antichrist. In a few words, they're amazed and they worship him. And you see why they worship him? He's incredible. And who's able to wage war? You can't beat this guy. So for the world, it's going to be, he is so powerful, so well situated, we had better capitulate. We had better bow down before him and become part of his fan club. And that's what the world will do. The world will be amazed by the Antichrist. The world will worship this beast that comes up. And that's what is going to happen, the response. And then look what he is going to be doing. The activity of this Antichrist is told to us now, starting in verse 5. And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Remember that horn that looks like a man, has eyes like a man, but boasts great things? And authority to act for 42 months was given to him. 42 months, if you take and translate that to years, it's 3.5 years. Remember the seven years that were in this final period, the 77s were in the final 7. Halfway through that time, the Antichrist is going to get full authority to do what he wants to do. The first portion, he is laying low, acting like a peacemaker. Halfway through, he goes to the temple, 2 Thessalonians 2. He declares that he is God. We're going to see that he is worshiped here as God. People are going to be amazed and worship. And notice that again. They're going to worship they're going to follow after the beast. They worship the dragon. Who is that? The world will worship Satan, and the world is going to worship the beast, the Antichrist. There's your final religion during the time of the last portion of the book of the tribulation. And so he gets authority for 42 months, 3.5 years, the final portion of the tribulation, to have free reign, and he will use that time to do some terrible things. And he opened his mouth, and he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, those who dwell in heaven. So again, this defiling, these blasphemous things that he speaks, all of that. And then you go on to verse 7, and it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. This beast that's going to come will seize the entire world by the throat, and everyone will be worshiping him. Not just revering or saying, hey, he's a pretty good guy. They will be worshiping him. They'll be worshiping Satan because Satan gives him his power, and he is going to go to war against the saints, the holy ones of God. That is, in the tribulation time, all of those who put their trust into Jesus in the tribulation to be saved, he's going to go to war against them. And this is, again, we've already seen that there will be martyrs during this time. It'll be a terrible time for those that are believers, and it's going to be a very hard time. So he goes to war with the saints, and he is allowed in this last period of the tribulation to even overcome them. It will look humanly if you had a clicker and you were tallying up the who's winning or losing. It's like the Antichrist wins another battle. The Antichrist seizes and kills some more. The Antichrist executes another group. The Antichrist, you can't stop him. Let's worship him more, the world will say. He will be winning until God comes and puts a stop to it. Now, this is the same thing that we're going to go back again to to Daniel chapter 7 and see another portion again. Daniel 7, a little further in that chapter. Daniel is wanting to know the explanation about those four beasts that he saw, and specifically the fourth beast, which turns out to be the Roman Empire, which hangs around until the very end of time in some fashion and gets revived. So then I desired to know, Daniel writing this, I desired to know the exact meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its claws of bronze, and which devoured, crushed, and trampled down the remainder with its feet. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, and before which 3 of them fell, namely, that horn which had, and here we are, that horn which had eyes and a mouth uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. So Daniel's wondering, what is this vision all about? And he says, and I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. That's what we just read in Revelation chapter 13. And he gets to do that, not forever. He overpowers them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. Here's the good news. And if nothing else, we can't put dates or names or exactly geographic locations, but know this, that when the Antichrist is in his heyday, persecuting the people of God and being worshiped on earth as God, that will continue to the end of the 7 years. And then the Ancient of Days will come. Guess who that is? God, in the person of the Son, Jesus. And we see that in Revelation later on too, in chapter 19, when he comes and judgment is going to be passed upon the Antichrist in favor of God's people. You thought they were losing the battle. You thought that the Antichrist was winning. It turns out that God is the God of eternity. And these souls were not disappearing. These souls were going home to him. And he's a God of life and death. He's the God who judges all. And he is going to rescue those saints. And those very saints will take possession of the kingdom of God on earth. Now Daniel hangs around, and you hang around too, because now here's the angel who's going to give some clarification to these things to Daniel. Daniel 7 is really interesting. Thus he said, this is the angel who is the he here. Thus this angel said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom of the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. That's exactly what Rome did for the centuries that it ruled over the entire known world. as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise. Stop there. So the 10 horns are 10 kings. And those 10 kings will come out of the Roman Empire, because that's the final kingdom. We know that already when we get to the New Testament. That's already on earth. That's the fourth kingdom that comes in sequence. And that fourth kingdom, sometime at the end of its time, it turns out, 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them. Guess who that is? That's the Antichrist, the beast. And he will be different from the previous ones, the previous kings, because he's empowered and fused by Satan, and he will subdue 3 kings. 3 of the 10, the Antichrist is going to subdue. Now, again, what that is going to be, trying to name the nations, this was really popular back when the European Union was just starting, especially when they only had 10 nations. Today, they got to think it's 26 at last count. So we got to have some of them fall back off. But if it's the EU, somebody would say, it's kind of gotten too big. But who knows what this federation of kings will be that might arise? Because see, they have time to rise up even during the 7-year tribulation. These 10 kings, I mean, and then it turns out he does battle and conquers 3. But these 10 horns, they might not be notable that we can pick them out right now, but they might swell up during the first part of the tribulation so that they rule with him in the second part. We don't know. So, but we do know that whatever is going to happen, it will happen exactly as God says. And we know that everything that's going on here is ultimately going to be wrapped up by God. And speaking of that final horn that arises that's different from all the rest, we now go on. That final horn, will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One. He's going to speak out against God, and he will wear down God's people. And that's because he is going to be given authority to conquer. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. And they will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But if you go on the next verse, it talks about, but his end comes. He wants to keep this thing going. And if the Antichrist could do it, he would be just priming the pump, trying to keep this kingdom that he's assembled in the tribulation going. He would try to continue persecuting the people that come to faith in Christ until he kills all of them upon the earth. He would do all of that he can do if he had opportunity. But that opportunity was not going to be given to him. But look at how the people respond, and then finally, look at this. Look at the call for how God's people are going to have to persevere during the tribulation when the Antichrist is in power. All, he says, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, the Antichrist. Now, this is a blanket statement. It turns out there are going to be a few who don't. As a general rule, we understand how language is used like this. Everybody's running after this celebrity. Everybody watches that TV show. Well, no, there are a lot of people that don't actually have TVs. But, so this is just the language that we use, is how language operates. All who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone. So it turns out that actually there's just a particular group that does, and then there's a very small group that doesn't. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. You're going to have 2 groups upon the earth. We could just sum it up like this: the unsaved and the saved. Those who are not written in the Lamb's book of life, those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. And guess which group is the unsaved and which group's the saved, right? Now, notice that it says there in the beginning of in verse 8, all who dwell in the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written. That phrase, from the foundation of the world. So there are 2 possible translations in this sentence, and this is not a matter of any textual difference. It's just in the New Testament Greek, that phrase, from the foundation of the world, can go one of 2 places in the sentence. It's there in the sentence. It could belong in understanding, to either, as the New American Standard writes it here, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life. As though those names have been written there from before the world. There are some translations, though, the King James and the NIV, for instance, are examples, and they move that phrase from the foundation of the world to the last part here, the Lamb who has been slain from the foundation of the world, is how they read. Now, I just bring that up because if you've got a Bible and you say, wait, Kevin, what you read is not, so there's not a textual issue, there's simply an interpretive, where does this from the foundation of the world go? Actually, I don't know that you'd be wrong to say in a certain sense in the mind of God, they're both true, but as far as which should it be, it turns out that the answer is solved not through the Greek grammar, because grammatically it could go one way or the other, but rather the issue is solved if we look at a parallel passage in the book of Revelation, chapter 17. Take a look at chapter 17, verse 8 with me for a moment. Revelation 17:8, and there again, John is talking with another angel. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. So in this verse, I just want you to see there is no question of which way does it get translated. Does it go? There is no other way it goes. The name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So what that does is it lends credibility to the decision that the New American Standard translators made to follow that back in Revelation 13, verse 8. At any rate, you have people who are in the Lamb's book of life, covered by the blood of the Lamb who was slain for them. And then you have the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is worshiping this beast. And none of God's people are worshiping the beast. You see the distinction? You either worship the beast or you don't. If you worship the beast, you are an unbeliever. That's why you're worshiping the beast. But if you're one of God's people, your name is written in the book of life from the Lamb's book of life from the foundation of the world. These people do not worship the beast. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. How many times have we heard this in the New Testament? Jesus would say this, and this term is like, let God have your full attention here. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. And here comes the warning. And here's the call to perseverance for the people of God. Now, it says, if anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. There will be people who are going to be taken into captivity. Now, you might notice here, and I know our time's getting away from us, but the word here is destined is in italics. That's because it's not actually in the text. The Greek word says, if anyone unto captivity. That's how it reads in the Greek text. If anyone unto captivity, to captivity he goes. I don't think that it's if he's destined. I think it turns out, I think he's saying the same idea. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. If you take that same idea and parallel it back, which this is what Greek does, it'll often leave out a phrase in one part of the sentence, but then pick it up by intuition for what is stated in the second part. And I think the idea, if anyone kills with the sword, I think the idea here is really, if anyone leads into captivity, would be a way to say it. It won't let me have my line. Takes my line from me. If anyone leads into captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Those that, people upon the earth are going to do violence, and violence is going to come back upon them. It is going to be a violent time. It's going to be a time where people are seized and judged. It is going to be a time where the Antichrist is having victory for this final 3.5 years against the people of God. And this is the word to God's people. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. In other words, believers who were alive at that time, they're going to have to really be ready to persevere, because it will be violent upon the earth. And it will be a hard time to not worship the Antichrist that everyone else is worshiping. And we're going to see how that gets outlined again, not next week because we won't be here, but the week after that, with the next beast, the false prophet who comes along, because he wants everybody to worship the first beast. And there will be a time that's passed that will be unlike anything we've ever seen, which is exactly what Jesus said about the tribulation. A tribulation like nothing that has ever been upon the earth and will never be again. And that's what we're reading. What we get from this is we walk away with a couple of jewels that you just cannot miss, and you can state them very quickly. If you're on God's side, or more importantly, if God is on your side, if you belong to the Lord, you are going to be a victor. You're going to be a victor even if your head is cut off. You're going to win. Because while the Antichrist is boasting and bragging and everybody's worshiping him, the Ancient of Days will come back. For anyone here that's concerned or uneasy about what's going to happen come January of this year, can I remind you that you are victors? And that if we get dragged away and get our heads cut off, I'm not saying it's going to happen in January. It might take till February. I don't know. No. I just mean, whatever's going to happen as we look at the world and we say, oh, what is going to take place as the world goes on? And listen, this is all over the world. These things happen all the time. This is sinful man always working and God's people are so often caught in the press of the hard time. Oh, what's going to happen to the people of God? We win. We win. It's the answer. Worship only the Lord. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing. Here's another application. It doesn't matter if everyone else in the world is running after something wrong. Keep your eyes on the Lord. Worship him alone. It's worth it. It's worth it to be an oddball. It's worth it to be considered a strange or peculiar people. And know that in the end, all will be well. All right, we will pick back up in this same chapter in our next portion as we go on. But these times will come. These times will come upon the earth. Now, our understanding is Jesus is coming back for the church before this stuff ever happens. So you and I will be out of here, but there will be people who will be brothers and sisters that come to faith in the same Lamb of God during the tribulation. There will be people that are of that group that inhabits the earth for those 7 years, and they will suffer terribly. How much better to get saved today, huh? All right. God, we just thank you. We thank you that when we see these things laid out, that it all indeed is borne out in your word, that this is no surprise to you. You knew this from the beginning, and you knew, Father, the destruction that this world has deserved as its judgment for rejecting you. So we know that difficult times must come upon the earth, for your wrath is really being poured out by giving the world the very thing it wants. The world wants the devil. You give him to the world. You give the world to him. The world wants to walk away from you and follow after only that it sees. You give them the Antichrist so that he can give them all that they're desiring. But in the end, Father, they are consumed by the very things that they are demanding. And we just want to thank you that you are the eternal one. You are the Ancient of Days. I pray that you would strengthen us as your people. And might we always, Jesus, keep our eyes upon you. In your name, amen.